This is coming out 25 years after that BBC Panorama broadcast the interview with Bashir. 25 years. And this is a kind of, again, rare headline by the Boris Johnson backing Murdoch Sunday Times. This phrase, these words, Boris Johnson is in retreat. Whatever the reason, whatever the kind of peg, the concept of Johnson being reportedly in retreat on anything among the Conservative MPs is the most significant event. This is Sunday the 29th of November 2020, and we are doing this part A of the world exclusive Khoodeelaar campaign diagnosis of Fleet Street. Fleet Street is the collective name we use, as many others do, but we use it to mean the Little Englander, England-centric, politically England-centric, that is right-wing, reactionary, racist, and corrupt collection, currently numbering 10 of newspapers that are associated with the kind of traditional street, Fleet Street, London EC4. Now, Fleet Street used to be where most of the newspapers were based at or near. For example, the Murdoch scum, that is Sun, used to be just in a street, side street off Fleet Street, as did the the Daily Mail Group, Rothermere. And the Daily Telegraph Group used to be, the Boris Graph used to be on Fleet Street itself. And the kind of the Observer too was in Fleet Street. And so they moved, all of them moved now away from Fleet Street, but the collective name remains. So when we say the Khoodeelaar campaign, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, we mean three things. One is the contents, and one is the actual agenda, the narrative, and the other is the corruption and criminality. Because Fleet Street, all these papers, including The Guardian, which fancies itself as being kind of a different kind of culture and narrative than Fleet Street, the rest of them. The Guardian has got subsumed in the Fleet Street culture of lies and lying and corruption and all the rest of it, despite the fact that they have kept overhyping their kind of standing by referring to this long-running holder of the post of the Manchester Guardian, a man called Scott, who has been again kind of retailed by Alan Rusbridger, in his latest so-called kind of experts account. on what journalism is about, news, and how to use it. I mean, it's a thinly disguised imitation of the title of the much smaller kind of book written about 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago, by Dennis McShane. Now, Dennis McShane was one time the National Union of Journalists president. Now, the president and secretary are two different posts, and president carries a lot less political internal clout than the post of secretary. And McShane was president of the National Union of Journalists about 40 years ago, in the 1970s, more than 40 years ago. And after he was forced to kind of leave the BBC because he made a bogus phone call, impersonated somebody else and made a phone call to a BBC program claiming to be somebody else. And it was a call that was made about the corruption of the Conservative cabinet minister, Reginald Maudling. So after this and some other local kind of difficulties, Dennis McShane relocated to Europe, a location somewhere in Europe, probably Brussels, where he became a kind of expert on all sorts of media-related things. He was working for the Steels Union, I think, as a media person. So he wrote a book called How to Use the Media. And we shall discuss that and Alan Rusbridger's News, How to Use It, in context, in detail, another time. But just for this introduction again, for anyone who is watching this for the first time, this campaign that is broadcasting this and making this broadcast is called Khoodeelaar. And Khoodeelaar is a Siloti language word. The anglicized form, which will be accessible on the internet, but the spelling of Silot is actually Sylhet, Sylhet. But the original Siloti phonetic language, Siloti language pronunciation is Siloti. So Khoodeelaar is a Siloti language word that I created in the beginning of this century as the crying word, crying call for the defense of the community against the attack by the big business agenda, fronted by the Crossrail railway line, which is a high-speed railway, actually, which is yet to be operational. It was supposed to have gone operational 2 years ago, but as we predicted during the campaign, during the height of the campaign against the Crossrail project, being used as a front to attack the East End of London, the promoters of Crossrail, the people who made the decisions, and the people who got the contracts for the various physical work, engineering work, tunnel and so on, we said exclusively, again, every single day for between 6 and 8 years, we said that it was flawed, that it was corruptly kind of run, the project, not the actual operational state, but the project state, the planning state, the state where they actually pushed the necessary act of parliament to get it going. At every stage, the Khoodeelaar campaign, coordinated by myself, articulated and advocated and represented by myself in the main, argued on the evidence, on the facts, that it was flawed, it was faulty, it was deceptive, and it was actually a diversion from the duties that the UK central government owed to the public using the transport system in London, or the public who needed to use a proper transport service in London, were being deceived and lied to and lied about. Now, our focus, that was, of course, the whole program, the whole project that we dissected, diagnosed, and kind of disposed of in terms of the platforms, public platforms, where the promotion was going on for the Crossrail project and its backers and its pushers. And we had to counter every single one that we could spot and we could identify. So that is the analysis of the Khoodeelaar campaign itself, and we analyze this evidence. And in the last kind of 17 years, since the foundation of the starting of the campaign, or the decision to start the campaign in December 2003, in the last 17 years, the principles that we devised and established and identified, articulated, they have become consolidated by further kind of contemporaneous, ongoing, additional evidence. And based on that evidence, which has been used, we have always used and we shall continue to use, and we have never used anything other than evidence. The evidence has strengthened the power of our analysis and our prediction, our forecast. For example, one of the central findings more than 12 years ago that we made was that the people who were promoting the line, the Crossrail propaganda line, were personally compromised by their own self-interest and their careers, and they were lying on instruction, on orders, rather than telling the truth as based on the evidence of the state of the project at the given time. Now, they never, ever said at any stage during the years before the construction started that there would be or there could be a technical problem that would delay the operation or the starting of the operation of the overly hyped Crossrail project or railway line or lines. If you take the Abbey Wood one in one direction and the one in the going to the Essex in another way. Abbey Wood goes to south of the River Thames, and the one that is the main line goes to a station in Essex, and it goes through East London. Of course, it goes through East London. It goes via Liverpool Street to Whitechapel, to Stratford, and further east. Now, we said that therefore they were lying, and one of the lies that has come into kind of public attention and has been confessed in public several times now, is that the technical safety and the actual operation of the signal system has yet to be tested and yet to be kind of found to be safely working. Tested for functioning and tested for safe functioning and tested for reliable functioning. That is the main thing they have been saying. But that is not the only thing they have been saying, because the latest claim by the project kind of controllers, they are, of course, doing this through the Transport for London, which is a part of the Greater London Assembly. And the mayor of London at the expense of London. So they're saying that they would need another whatever, hundreds of millions, whatever, pounds, in order to keep the project work going. And if they don't get the money, as they have articulated in the last 3 weeks, or as publicly reported in the last 3 weeks, then they would have to mothball the project. Mothball is like halting the project, but it's worse than halting. Mothball is like consigning, condemning to like maybe never again to be operational, or never to be operational at all. Now that is a serious vindication of our analysis, because everything we said came across at the time, because we were the only ones that said it, came across as being us making a campaigning point, and we were perhaps suspected of exaggerating the impact and the extent of the corruption and the lying and the unfitness for purpose of so many of the directors of Crossrail and promoters. And that is on the one side about the people involved in the actual decision making at the project. But we also had to investigate and identify the flaws and the unfitness in the presentation of the case to Parliament, to the select committees in Parliament. The first one was the select committee of MPs, and the final one was the select committee of peers, members of the House of Peers, which is called the upper house. In effect, that is the lower house in terms of the impact and the power in the structure of Parliament. So the presentation of the case literally was advocated by highly paid licensed law traders, almost all of them that were fronting the presentation to parliamentarians were QCs, that is to say, they carry a tag called Queen's Counsel. That is a tag given to supposedly senior and experienced licensed law trading barristers. Essentially what it means is that anyone carrying a tag of QC or Queen's Counsel can command higher amounts of fees for their supposed work and expertise. Now, the QCs that appeared before parliamentary committees arguing the case for Crossrail were, first of all, they were dishonest. Secondly, they didn't have any understanding of communities, and they didn't understand anything about the impact on the public in terms of finance, in terms of the kind of usefulness and relevance, utility of the proposed crossrail line. And they didn't have any understanding of the concept of the economy, even the concept of the capitalist economy. And they didn't understand transport. They didn't understand the history of railway transport, either in London or in England at all. And it was quite obvious from their kind of speeches made to committees of MPs and then to the House of Peers that these licensed law trading QCs were engaged in a licensed career of crime and criminality. Because today's news, or today's kind of general discussion on the social media about the current project, which is being blindly promoted, almost identically using the same kind of slogans that they used to promote the Crossrail project, is the HS2, that is to say, High Speed 2, which goes from London to Euston to Birmingham and so on. And the main kind of argument for taking billions of public money away from other needs in society to this project, HS2 High Speed 2, was that it would be high speed, obviously, and that it would save anything between 10 to 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the time, traveling time. Now, we said the same thing against the Crossrail when they used the time scale, they needed the traveling time needed, and they said saved. We said, what is the purpose of referring to saving traveling time, half an hour or whatever? And there was no answer. Now, environmentally speaking, high speed or any kind of speed that has direct impact on the environment, negative impact on the environment, must be discouraged, quite apart from the health and well-being of the people made to travel at that kind of speed on vehicles that are very fast. Because our bodies, the metabolism and other kind of constituents in our bodies suffer detrimental losses from the impact of speed. Now, that is something that is the subject of a separate discussion, because we are talking about the headlines, and the headlines include this one that we pointed out, that they don't say that Johnson is in retreat about anything. And what they're saying today is that Rishi Sunak as well has not been talking about HS2, whereas the nearly 200 billion pounds that have been earmarked for this high-speed 2 railway line has been done by depriving other areas of society and social and economic needs and other parts of the kind of ordinary transport that is actually not environmentally dangerous or in terms of health harmful to the extent that HS2 is and can be. And the evidence, the context of the reference to HS2 in the context of COVID-19 is very interesting indeed, because we have said, I mean, this is today's kind of recognition is only today, but we have been saying it, that the argument for speed is superfluous, and the argument for kind of railway transport, railway traveling, is also almost redundant, because people are not traveling anything like in the numbers on the trains in the UK as they did a few years ago. And it's the decrease in the use of railway travel has been occurring since before the virus infected the country, because the cost of traveling on the railway system, or what there is of the system, because it has been flawed and dysfunctioning in various places across the country, across England, the cost has been formidably, prohibitively higher and increasing, and thus discouraging people from using railway transport. That's the definitive factor. If people don't travel, then the transport system, which is there or created for that purpose, becomes useless, and it is a complete waste. And that's what is happening. But the accusation against Johnson is that he's still in denial, that he's still firmly backing HS2, and he doesn't see the severe additional crisis to the finance that this is imposing for no reason. And they're saying the same thing about Rishi Sunak. The Sunak is the finance minister in the Boris Johnson fronted cabal of a government. And the allegation against his wife having a 430 million pound share in the Indian-based information kind of technology firm called Infosys, which, according to The Guardian, was co-founded by her father. Now, Rishi Sunak hasn't made an entry of that fact that his wife owns 430 million pounds worth of the ownership of that company in his register of ministerial kind of interests, or ministerial register of interests, if you like. Now, I said yesterday that won't necessarily lead to his demotion or his losing kind of credibility, because every single kind of MP in the last kind of 5 years, Brexit years, Conservative MP who has done anything wrong has been excused. Now, that is the record before the Conservatives became even more defiant of the rules. After the 12th of December 2019 UK election, which gave them 70 plus extra parliamentary seats in the House of Commons, thus making them completely secure in terms of passing laws and whatever. So they can't be stopped by MPs or Parliament. There has to be independent evidence and independent pressure. So what is happening with the HS2 is just a tip of the iceberg, because the record of Boris Johnson in public kind of office began when he was mayor at the expense of London, starting in May 2008. So it's 12 years since Boris Johnson started holding a public post that carried the power on his part to spend billions of pounds, which is more money he had as the incumbent in the post of the so-called mayor at the expense of London than many of the countries in Africa and Asia. Forget about China and India and Malaysia and Indonesia, but most of the other countries in Asia have less money to spend than the holder of the post of mayor at the expense of London. That's a general comparison. And there is no evidence that even when they didn't have the large majority, the Conservatives were being held to account by the Labour Party opposition. And we forget the fact that there was Corbyn for 5 years. Even the non-Corbyn leaders of the Labour Party have failed to hold the Conservatives to account. So the Sunday Times is doing that rare thing, admitting that Johnson can be in retreat. So much paper, extra paper as supplements. And the World News page on page 27 has got a montage of the scientist and Trump being on the pictures of these and the Israeli flag and the American flag being burned in the aftermath of according to the Sunday Times, Israeli secret operations, Mossad, assassinated Iran's nuclear scientist. And there is a picture of Sarah Baxter, who apparently is now filing from the USA, saying that Biden has got 100 days to prove that he is the new Roosevelt. And Camilla Long in the comment said that women are not victims. And there is a cart being pulled by what might be Dominic Cummings, and it is being pushed by somebody else. What he looks like is not clear. And as the crier sitting on it is Johnson, who is shouting, "Bring out your dead," as they are passing the pub. And it seems that the cart is full of pubs that they've shut or have been shut. And the headline from the Sunday Times in their editorial, the first editorial of 3, and the first editorial is the longest one, which says, "All we want for Christmas is some clarity from number 10. That is Boris Johnson. And there is a big news review piece about Diego Maradona, who is being called a saint, Saint Diego. And the BBC, one presenter of the Marr program, Andrew Marr, is given a space to write a piece with the headline, "Lighten up, you doubters. Britons still have the power to lead and electrify." And there is a collection of photographs, images of sports people and television presenters and so on, celebrities. This is the same thing as the Daily Express does. The Express finds any excuse to run a headline that gives Boris Johnson the image that he is already Roosevelt. And there is no evidence that the Sunday Times is bothered about the economy, about the judiciary, about the accountability at any level, and most certainly not at the level of the local councils. And there is a typically false kind of sympathy for the disadvantaged children being neglected during the lockdown. Why we say false? Because if they actually cared for the disadvantaged, then they would be reporting the truth about the disadvantage every single issue. And they would be pinpointing the actual causes of the disadvantage, which is the absence of democracy, absence of accountability at every local area where the disadvantage is located and originated and found. And the lack of accountability includes, of course, housing, includes the criminal behavior of the local councils on the what is called the inner cities or the poor areas. Tower hamlets is in the kind of group that actually has the highest amount and volumes and causes of these problems. But the Sunday Times doesn't do that. And the kind of call for free speech or the freedom of speech is a completely shallow call when it comes to these organs, this press, suppressing evidence from the local communities. So there is nothing in Fleet Street in the journalism that actually relates to the people in the communities across the country. So where do they find the agenda? Where do they find the kind of topics that they fill their papers with? It's their owners and the big business and the other kind of suppressors of the truth, enemies of democracy and democratic accountability, who don't want the people to become democratically entitled to advocate for their own rights. And that is also the case about why the Sunday Times and the others suppress the kind of crimes that go on through the court system, courts bureaucracies by the licensed law traders. So a woman has been kind of losing the habit of eating McDonald's and thus saving 11,000 pounds a year and also losing 6 stones in weight. That's in the Daily Star on Sunday. And they've got on the kind of tabloids like the Daily Star on Sunday and on the Sun on Sunday or the Sun Daily Scum, they've got so-called working class kind of comments writer or columnist. And they have a mugshot of them looking as nasty, angry, upset, and annoying and annoyed as they can make them to be. I mean, this is absolutely rubbish. There are words that cannot be said on the record, but this is what they are. And they've got Mail on Sunday, sorry, the Star on Sunday, this face is supposed to be a working class, white kind of voice of the working class whites or the poor whites or ordinary whites. He has been, as I have said before, he took over the student publication in the year after I left. I was elected to edit that by the students at the University of East London, what is now University of East London, in 1976. And this one was elected to succeed me, because that was a one-year kind of election. And when he wasn't kind of seeking to get elected about a year or two previously, he contributed to the pieces to the publication that I edited and produced in what is now the University of East London. So, in one of the handwritten pieces, he wrote a scathing, very scathing, vicious, hateful attack on the skinheads and the racists. And I cannot this minute say whether I can find any edition of the publication that I was editing at the time, for which he made that contribution. If I can, I'll share it in an edition later in due course. Why I'm saying this? Because this same person was writing at the time as a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. And where did he go? He went to the exact opposite of what the Socialist Workers' Party kind of claimed to be engaged in. And he became the voice of OI, which is the absolute opposite of the Socialist Workers and the kind of thing that Tommy Robinson has been doing now. This is a fact, exclusive evidential fact. And the fact that the same person is now writing a column on television tells you all you need to know that it's absolutely unreliable and completely careeristic. To what extent he is making up things or lying or denying things that he said in the piece that he gave me, handwritten piece that he had written for me to publish. And as far as I remember at that time, he was trying to keep on side with me. Now, where is the actual evidence that these people who write these kind of journalistic pieces for Fleet Street, where do they do their thinking? What is it that they actually use? Or what uses them to push themselves into writing about X or Y? Is it the person or are they the persons who edit and control the paper, given title? Or are there other factors? And if there are, what are those factors? Why am I saying this? Why am I questioning this? Because every time I write something or I say something, I see the evidence. And I start by the evidence. Start by referring to the evidence. And these people don't refer to the evidence. Why? Why am I saying that? Because there is a kind of slogan that is all over all the titles. And that slogan cannot have been spontaneously thought up by even two so-called journalists, reporters, commentators working on separate publications. This would be impossible. And yet, out of the 10 newspapers titles, normally, because the Financial Times doesn't appear on every day, every 7 days of the week. It appears 6 days, and the edition on Saturday is dubbed the weekend edition. So it is supposed to cover Sunday as well as Saturday. But having explained that, the 9, let's say, titles on the Sunday are running identical kind of stories on many of the aspects of the government's policies and directions and whatever. That is one kind of proof that they're lying, because they're not writing these by having done the necessary investigation individually. They're writing this because they've been handed this thing to write, either from the copy of the Press Association, which dishes out government kind of releases, and the big pharma companies and others, because in the Fleet Street papers, there are only 4 kinds of groups of people or categories of, let's say, leaders of the propaganda. One is the government ministers, Johnson and whatever, and the other is the big companies. And the others are hidden from the texts, but actually the people who own these titles, these Fleet Street papers and titles. And the others are unknown, undisclosed. But they are not ordinary people in the community, in the society. That's the biggest aspect of our diagnostic finding. For the last 200 years plus, 225 years, let's say, since the newspapers we know now as Fleet Street began, and not all of them began 225 years ago. There were only the Times and the Observer and 1 or 2, but the Times and the Observer have lasted, let's say. Others have disappeared and been replaced. And the Telegraph and the Guardian came later. And of course, the Sun and the Mail came much later, and the Mirror. But essentially, there is this mode of operation. It's not about the code of ethics of journalism that the National Union of Journalists kind of sometimes refers to. The National Union of Journalists is completely kind of dormant when it comes to upholding the codes of conduct. And so, what is it that they actually are driven by? There is no evidence that they're bothered to share what drives them with their readers. For example, there is this piece by Rod Liddell in the Sunday Times. I mean, he just writes it. What evidence does he have about the experience of people in the communities? He has none. Well, he has not shared any. So these people who are writing columnists, every paper has got about 5 or 6 at the least. And in the Sunday Times and the Times newspaper and the Boris Club, there are more, as there are on the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. But common among them is the absence of sourcing. They don't really tell the truth about where they get the motivation, where they get the spark, quite apart from the fact that they are paid either as freelancers or as in-house kind of full-time staff. Whatever the title, whatever the difference in terms of the title or in terms of the contract, there is one common thing. That what they write must be centrally addressing the issues facing society. And in the context of the virus, of course, that is the field about which they can write. But they have to declare where they got the motivation, where they decided to write about this particular aspect or that. And they don't say that, they don't share that. I'm saying this because for the last months I have said that Fleet Street doesn't report what is happening on the ground and individuals who are infected by this thing, and how does the thing operates, how does it operate, and A to Z. And the reason why I have been saying this is that aspect, how the thing operates, how it affects people, A to Z, everything, every aspect of it, that would be worth trillions across the world, because lives would be saved, and all these trillions pounds, dollars worth of resources, equipment, and other things would be saved if people were able to identify, with the help of the so-called free media, what are the things that they can avoid and what are the things that they should avoid and how they should conduct their affairs, and not just wearing masks and social distance. These are not effective as they could be or should be, because for a start, most people in the shops, like today, the outlet that I visited to get these papers, I mean, at around 1 o'clock GMT, 1300 hours GMT, the outlet is more crowded than it should be, which means that this is a Sainsbury's outlet. Sainsbury's, one of the big 3 retailers in the UK, is not observing the rules. It is letting in too many customers at once. There is no social distance between customers, not even inches, not at the outlet that I visited. And it was even worse yesterday, Saturday. So the Sainsbury's has got outside a notice saying that they kind of are important. There are important notices saying that they place highest kind of importance to the safety of their staff and of customers. But that is not true in reality. And during the past months in the reports, many reports said that Sainsbury's kind of shops were one of the biggest spreaders of the virus. And there is no account, there is no update, there is no analysis of that in any of the papers today. What they're talking about is like Boris Johnson is being mentioned by about 20 writers on the Mail on Sunday. But they're not really telling readers what it is that he's actually doing in terms of the control of the spread of the virus and all the other physical aspects that they've been leaving out. And so they've got Boris Johnson all over the Mail on Sunday. Sarabani is talking about politicians and, of course, Boris Johnson. Dan Hodges is talking about the lockdown to lockdown, and Boris Johnson writes for the MOS. That's their boast. What's the point? And there is this piece on the Mail on Sunday, of course, saying that the Netflix is kind of misleading viewers because viewers may think that what is being shown is fact. And they're having a number of big spreads attacking Netflix crown. And there is an admission on page 10, and it's a headline: Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, takes lead as Prime Minister fights Tory revolt. Mail on Sunday poll shows growing fears for the economy, and nearly 2/3 oppose Save Christmas plan. And there is a headline saying Commons, that is House of Commons, House of Parliament, that is House of Commons, fate of Boris Johnson's tears, that is, it's like a tire, T-I-E-R, tear. the English language phonetically is quite misleading. There are at least 5 words sound so similar. Tears. Tears, this is stages. This should be replaced by the word stages or magnitude. Magnitude 1, magnitude 2, magnitude 3. Not tears, because it makes you cry trying to get it right. And they're saying the common fate of Boris's stages, let's say, now lies in Keir's hands, that is Keir Starmer. And they've got a piece in Johnson's name which says, "We are so nearly out of our captivity. We can see the sunlit upland pastures ahead. But if we try to jump the fence now, we will tangle ourselves in the last barbed wire." Now, this is as stupid a kind of placard, if you like, as anyone could write. Sunny uplands is a stupidity. Sunny uplands is not to be used literally as a phrase, but this idiot is using it. He doesn't understand that sunny uplands is a phrase of mockery of those who lie and fantasize. And sunny uplands has been used for the last at least 2 good years. I mean, as long as 2 years. That is what I mean by good years. Good length, I mean. That the Brexiteers were projecting to the UK public, the Little Englanders, a prospect of post-Brexit sunny uplands. Now, Johnson has completely left Brexit out of it now. And he is now projecting his so-called measures to deal with the virus, as if that is the same thing as his get Brexit done. Well, let's say the events have taken place that have condemned Boris Johnson, consigned him to irrelevance. Only a matter of time before Johnson is replaced. That is something that is going to happen. But the papers are not truthfully telling that. Now, there is a piece by the MP for the Midlands, Broxbourne, Charles Walker, and his piece is headline, "This is what happens when we politicians trash ancient liberties." Now, what this is about is a woman who was dragged by the police outside the House of Commons. And I'm saying the 9 police raided church service. And an African man who is a Christian, Reverend Daniel Matiola, wins an apology after wrongly being threatened with fine. And a Tory MP calls this behavior by the police the sort of thing that goes on in China. We'll talk about China in a minute more. But Eton College has got a teacher who was sacked over his questioning of the feminist dogma about toxic masculinity. And the head teacher who fired him is facing an angry backlash and a pupil petition condemning Eton for a complete lack of backbone. And they've got a picture of Eton's head teacher, Simon Henderson, who is being condemned for having no backbone. There's a piece, 2 pages piece about mass Etonian revolt. It is said that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. The centuries later, 2 centuries later, Britain's most venerable school has become a battleground in the war of woke. Now, woke is a kind of racist and corrupt word invented by the racists and crooks to discredit anti-racist analysis and campaign. But they also use the same word woke to disguise their labeling of people who criticize other kind of values of discrimination, etc. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of masculinity and feminism because that would take too long. But there is this other debate going on about transgender identity. Most people in Fleet Street and in society have said the obvious, which is that it may be the individual who has got transgendered in their opinion, but their body hasn't changed. So the men who have become transgendered women have been called men nonetheless. And in the words of Julie Burchell, she has said that they are men appearing disguised as women. And similar opinion is held by J.K. Rowling and also by Suzanne Moore, who has been forced to leave the Guardian, resign the Guardian. So the Eton mass revolt is, of course, an overstatement, but it's not untruthful to say that there is serious kind of unsettlement between these two groups, feminists and people who, like this head teacher of Eton School, think that feminists cross the line and go overboard, over the line, if you like. And there is a piece by the chair of the Charity Commission, a woman called Baroness Stowell. Now, Stowell is an arch conservative, and she's not doing her job as the chair of the Charity Commission, nor is the Charity Commission doing its job. And again, we shall be discussing at length the failures of the Charity Commission, or the role of the Charity Commission as a self-deregulating regulator of charities, let's say. The laissez-faire, the policy of non-interference by the government, by the state, has become rampant during the last 10 years of the Conservatives. Of course, it wasn't something that was only initiated after the May 2010 loss to the Conservatives and the lackeys, the Lib Dems. It began even during Gordon Brown and Tony Blair's regime. And as I have been saying from time to time, the role of the leaders of the Labour Party, who have possessed and practiced different shades of societal engagement. I don't call them socialist because they have not been socialist in power. None of them. And I also assert that kind of characterization that I have made of Jeremy Corbyn as being the garden gnome. Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have the intellect, and Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have the morality and the ethics or the integrity, let alone the insight, let alone the far sight, to deal with, let alone oppose, let alone provide an alternative to the serial Kabbalist crooks and cliques doing business as agents of the big business and the military industrial complex in the Conservative Party. Jeremy Corbyn failed completely, utterly, abysmally failed to even make a list of the particular previous week's failures by Boris Johnson when he faced Johnson at the so-called Prime Minister's questions. At first, when he first started, and it was Cameron in post as the so-called Prime Minister, I thought that Jeremy Corbyn was failing because he was new to the job and he was learning. And that by the time he spent a year facing the Conservatives, he would have picked up enough insight, information to start to attack the lies, the dishonesty, the cruelty, and the corruption of the Conservatives. But Corbyn failed. Now, even if Corbyn hadn't been attacked by the other fronts that they had opened, they were going to open against him, which they did. They were going to open the front after they became convinced that he was going to get the votes of the membership for the leadership of the Labour Party. So the people who were working the agenda to get rid of any leader of the Labour Party who was even moderately kind of left-wing or on the left, they would have got rid of him even without the anti-Semitic kind of thing. They would have found something else. And when they hit him with the anti-Semitism claims, and this is the record, let anyone who watches this and has contrary evidence to what I'm saying, let me have that evidence. At this minute, I don't recognize any evidence exists. to contradict what I am saying about Corbyn's failures. Jeremy Corbyn did not appear to read the papers. Now, I am reading all the Fleet Street papers and more every day. And I've been doing this since a long time before Corbyn became a member of parliament. I think it's essential to get the facts, not confusing the facts with the opinions and the agenda. You need the facts as a kind of guidance, as a tag, as a kind of peg, as a lever, as a connection, so that you can analyze the presentation of the fact, the use of the fact, the abuse of the facts, and the absence of the facts. Because if you have elimination, then you've got some facts on display and you've got others not covered at all, covered up. It seemed that Corbyn didn't have any knowledge of the contents of what the media was doing. Corbyn came across, and this can be tested by looking at the contents of his video clips of his speeches at every forum wherever he was recorded for 5 years. He was in post as leader. Corbyn didn't understand the very wide spread of events that constitute politics. And Corbyn didn't know the evidence of the contents of the papers and the media. And Corbyn didn't understand the relationship between the members of parliament and the ordinary people, the masses, the many. The word that he became kind of tutored into using late in his 5 years was the word the many, or the phrase the many. And the many, if the many were neglected and overlooked and ignored by the others, like the right wing, the conservatives, and the reactionaries, the imperialists, then so did Jeremy Corbyn. For example, local councils are elected entities. Elected councillors constitute the majority of the local councils in England. Let me just see how many councils there are at the current kind of time. So it says on the internet, there are 408 principal, that is unitary, upper, and second tier. That is again the stages, TIER, councils in the UK. 20 county councils, 192 district councils, and 190 unitary councils in England. There are 343 councils in England. So the pattern of local government in England, this is the entry from the Wikipedia I'm reading from. The pattern of local government in England is complex, with the distribution of functions varying according to the local arrangements. And this is a long piece about local councils, and it has got headlines: regional authorities and combined authorities, principal councils and parishes. And there is the history, and there are the people and the councillors and mayor. Now, it is saying that councils have historically had no split between executive and legislative. Functions are vested in the council itself and then exercised usually by committees or subcommittees of the council. And the chairman of the council itself has authority to conduct the business of meetings of the full council, etc. And so that's a complex, that is an admission of the complexity of this local council. But there are hundreds of councils, let's say, in England and Wales and in the UK. And by definition, they affect most of the people's lives in their local areas. So the day-to-day behavior of councils, policies, affect more people than the day-to-day behavior of MPs or of central government. Worth thinking about. And yet, Jeremy Corbyn completely messed up. He never once in 5 years of his speeches that I have monitored and studied, he never once recognized this. The width, the spread of the people affected by the behavior of local councils, whatever the name of the council, district council, unitary, principal, whatever. Instead, the only time that Corbyn has recognized the role of councils is when he has spoken about the workers, that is the employees of councils. Just in the same way that he has done that about the NHS staff, nurses and workers. Now, nobody is denying the existence of workers and the importance of the workers' work. But when compared to the vast majority of the people that the workers are given credit blindly for saving and serving, those people are the absolute majority in the whole demography of the United Kingdom, of England, of Wales, of Northern Ireland, and of Scotland, of course. But Corbyn has failed totally to relate to these facts. And as he has denied that fact, that knowledge, he has also denied the rights of the vast majority of the many people that have been and are being denied by the workers. Those workers doing the wrong things, those workers who are prejudiced, those workers who are unjust in their attitude and understanding, those workers that are not properly trained, schooled, educated, prepared, or held to account. And Corbyn has never connected the accountability owed by these workers to the many. Accountability is not something Corbyn has uttered, ever. Now, assuming that Corbyn entered the House of Commons in 1983, let's see which year he got first elected. Now they say that Jeremy Corbyn is a British politician who served as leader of the Labour Party and leader of the opposition from 2015 to 2020. He has been Member of Parliament for Islington North since 1983. On the political left of the Labour Party, he ideologically identified as a socialist and democratic socialist. Now, 83, let's say. So 1 year before he got elected, he appeared at a general rally about racism held in the Altavali Park in 1982. And I was the speaker before him. So it was a microphone loudspeaker in the Altavali Park of the Whitechapel Road, London E1, near the Aldgate Eastern exit. And as I gave or handed over the mic to him, and he received the mic from me. Now, I have mentioned this before. It's not because I need that kind of statement to be made by people, but it is contextually absolutely vital. As he received the mic from me, Jeremy Corbyn said, "I wish I could speak like you." Now, that was 1982. 5 years earlier, in 1977, in Tooting, which is in the London borough of Wandsworth, after I spoke at a small gathering, very small gathering, held in a small room in the Wandsworth Town Hall, Tooting, I was approached by a man who said, "I wish I could speak like you." Exactly the same phrase. Now, all these years later, I'm now wondering whether there is a kind of training school where they pick up this kind of false kind of statements to ingratiate themselves to some of the victims of their attacks later in order to get to know the person or whatever. And that man was Kenneth Lying Still Livingstone, 1977. And Livingstone and Corbyn have been very close. It has been revealed after Corbyn became a kind of MP, and then successively as time went on. And when he became leader of the Labour Party, it became quite obvious that he and Ken Lying Still Livingstone were politically and personally quite closely associated with one another. So did the two of them learn this phrase that they kind of applied to me, hit me with, and they must have used it to other people as well? Whatever the actual reason for the two of them separately uttering the same kind of sentence to me about identical kind of behavior, because Lying Still Livingstone had also shared the platform in Tooting Town Hall with me, as Jeremy Corbyn did at the Altavali Park in 1982. Whatever their kind of origin, genesis, reason, these people obviously noticed one thing about my work, which is obviously expressed in that, although the sincerity of their kind of statement is a different matter. But it was a fact, undeniable fact, that I was speaking at a public forum or a public platform. And they both picked up on my speech, my style, my content, what I must have come across as. Now, if that is the case, if that is true and it cannot be denied, then how is it that Ken Livingstone has never followed up that statement by commenting on my work in other respects? Of course, he has commented, but not logically as it would suggest from his comment on the occasion of the Tooting town hall in 1977. In fact, the battles that I have been involved in organizing, mobilizing in London in defense of the community, including the Khoodeelaar campaign, are battles directly caused by the corrupt behavior and corrupt policies of Ken Livingstone. And it is Ken Livingstone who destroyed one aspect of Jeremy Corbyn's, if you like, occupation of the position of the leader of the Labour Party. Because Livingstone had been already responsible for making a series of ignorant, very ignorant, unsocialist, undemocratic, unethical, immoral, pro-racist, stupid utterances alleging all kinds of things against people who asked him mere questions, let's say. Anyone who asked Ken Livingstone an uncomfortable question about his policies, Livingstone would not give them the answer that logically, rationally, he should have given them. Livingstone instead turned on them, and if he could find a kind of connection with their being Jewish or similar, then he would abuse the occasion and make a reference to their being Jewish or to their being connected with their experience of the ordinary Jewish people, as he did with Oliver Feingold. Oliver Feingold is no longer a byliner on the London Evening Standard. But Oliver Feingold was at the time kind of either freelancing for or was on the staff of the London Evening Standard. And that was during the second, if memory serves, this was during the second of the 2 4-year terms that Ken Livingstone was kind of enjoying or engaged in as the mayor at the expense of London. So Oliver Feingold asked Livingstone a question about either an incident that had been in need of verification, authentication by fact-checking. He was asking him what I would say, and I had thought was a basic fact-related question. So if Ken Livingstone didn't want to talk to or like to give that answer to Oliver Feingold, he could have said, look, I'm not going to speak to you on that. That would have been the end of the matter. Guess what? What did Ken Livingstone do? He attacked Oliver Feingold, who turned out later to be of Jewish background and identity. And instead of answering Oliver Feingold's question, which had nothing to do with ethnicity or race or whatever, as far as I can still work out, Ken Livingstone accused Oliver Feingold, who was only asking him a question. Remember, nothing else. And he's asking that question of Ken Lyons to Livingstone was distorted gratuitously by Ken Lyons to Livingstone, who accused Oliver Feingold of acting like a Nazi concentration camp ward or something, a guard. Now, can you imagine how grotesquely kind of offensive and distorted that kind of utterance is? This was a journalist in the conventional sense of the term, and putting aside for the time being the political role of the evening non-standards that I completely oppose and condemn, and I have been doing this for a very long time. This person, Oliver Feingold, was doing an ordinary job, asking him, as the occupant in the post of mayor at the expense of London, a factual question about how did it go? Whatever event Ken Lyons to Livingstone was leaving when Oliver Feingold caught up with him, how did it go? And Livingstone, instead of saying, I don't want to speak to you, or I don't want to talk about this, whatever it was, he accused Oliver Feingold of acting like a Nazi concentration camp guard, which would be absolutely horrifying and hurtful to any human being with any decency. Because you do not use that kind of reference. You do not. But Ken Lyons to Livingstone did. And what happened as a result of that was that Ken Lyons to Livingstone, politically, morally, ethically, confirmed the worst view about him that people who were politically opposed to him had held, but had no kind of solid piece of evidence like that one to use against him. Now let's see what Livingstone's actual date of that crime was. Okay, this is from The Guardian. And this is under local government. And it's a transcript, headed transcript. And this is a transcript of the taped exchange between Ken Livingstone and Oliver Feingold outside City Hall, that is the structure, the complex which is on the south bank of the river, just near the Tower Bridge, which is headquartering the mayor's offices. And this one is dated the 25th of February 2006, 1619 GMT. Now, either it happened on that day or it happened a year earlier in 2005. But the transcript is worth actually going through. Oliver Feingold, Mr. Livingstone, Evening Standard, how did it? Ken Livingstone, oh, how awful for you. That's the first answer. And the guy, Oliver Feingold, wasn't allowed by Livingstone to even complete his question. Basic question. Feingold, how did it tonight go? Livingstone, Have you thought of having treatment? Now, Livingstone is accusing him of being mentally deranged for asking him, how did it go? Now, was Livingstone the sick one, or was it Feingold, the reporter, the sick one? By all evidence, it would suggest that Livingstone had been already undergoing treatment for mental sickness. Feingold, how did it tonight go? He's not taking any notice of Livingstone's stupidity. And Livingstone, have you thought of having treatment? Feingold, was it a good party? What does it mean for you? It was a social party, not a political party that Livingstone was obviously returning from. Was it a good party? What does it mean for you? Livingstone, what did you do before? Right, that's where he starts. Were you a German war criminal? Now, can you make any connection between what Feingold was asking and that stupid, obscene question from Livingstone? Feingold. And Feingold actually says that transcript I had forgotten. He's saying there, no, I am Jewish. I wasn't a German war criminal. Livingstone, right, Feingold. I'm actually quite offended by that. So, how did tonight go, Livingstone? Well, you might be, but actually, you are just like a concentration camp guard. You are just doing it because you are paid to, aren't you? Feingold, great. I have you on record for that. So how did it tonight? How did tonight go? Livingstone, it's nothing to do with you because your paper is a load of scumbags. Feingold, how did tonight go? Livingstone, it's reactionary bigots. And then Feingold says, I'm a journalist. I'm doing my job. Livingstone, and who supported fascism? He's meaning that either the Evening Standard or Feingold, but it could not be Feingold. But you cannot see what Livingstone's mental state is. He comes across as being really sick. Feingold, I'm only asking for a simple comment. I'm only asking for a comment. Livingstone, well, work for a paper that isn't. Feingold, I'm only asking for a comment. Livingstone, that had a record of supporting fascism. Feingold, you have accused me. After the words, you have accused me, there is a gap on the tape, followed after 5 seconds by a sound indistinguishable other than its being a male voice. Now, they don't continue. Let's see the transcript anywhere else if there is any. Okay, let's go. This is the Guardian in a piece posted on Saturday, the 12th of February, 2005. It's a piece by Hugh Moore. And it's headed, Livingstone faces inquiry of a Nazi guard jibe at Jewish reporter. Ken Livingstone likened a Jewish newspaper reporter to a Nazi concentration camp guard. Ken Livingstone is facing a second official investigation into his personnel conduct after he likened a Jewish newspaper reporter to a Nazi concentration camp guard. So my reference earlier, before I checked the contents online, to a Nazi concentration camp must be based on that memory of that time. That was in February. This report was in February 2005. So let's say just under 15 years ago. Just over 15 years ago. Inquiries by the Standards Board can lead to locally elected officials being censured, suspended, or, in most serious cases, disqualified from office. Mr. Livingstone suffered the indignity of a Standards Board investigation in his first term after it was alleged that he manhandled a man at a party. And he was cleared on the balance of probabilities. So, anyway, this is the reference to Livingstone I'm making in contextually updating my analysis of the unfitness for purpose of Jeremy Corbyn. And the fact that Ken Livingstone became a clearly identified supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, the newly kind of elected leader of the Labour Party, did not help the general image of Jeremy Corbyn, because Livingstone had already established himself as a very toxic, very poisonous character. And that was made worse by the fact that he was painted as very close to Jeremy Corbyn. Not only by the others, but by him appearing on public platforms immediately around the time and after the time of Corbyn getting elected leader of the Labour Party in 2015. I mean, Ken Livingstone made a series of absolutely unfact-checked and confused, unsustainable utterances while claiming to be speaking in support of Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership. So Ken Livingstone, whom I call Ken Lying Still Livingstone, because of my study of him directly, person to person study in public over, let's say, 4 years in the Greater London Council's headquarters, the County Hall, which is sited opposite the Palace of Westminster on the southern bank of the River Thames in London. I spent 4 years of my life in County Hall that included almost daily direct challenges, ethical, evidential, democratic, moral, social, anti-racist, diagnostic challenges by me against Livingstone. Livingstone's regime. And my challenges included strictly factually researched and factually substantiated and factually founded evidence of wrongdoings being done at the time by the regime at the Greater London Council, being fronted by Ken Lying Still Livingstone in the post of leader of the Greater London Council. Nobody else was doing that, and nobody else could do that. I decided very early on, especially when I found that Livingstone has sabotaged the due process of democracy in London and had led the coup against Andrew Mackintosh. Andrew Mackintosh had been the group leader for the Labour Party on the Greater London Council during the period leading up to the election for the GLC that was held in May 1981. So when the election result came out, it was the Tories, who had been in control of the GLC, were defeated by the Labour GLC slate led by Andrew McIntosh. And within 24 hours of that election, victory by the Labour Party over the Conservatives, Andrew McIntosh was removed in a coup d'etat staged by Ken Livingston Livingstone and his cabal of so-called left members. And McIntosh was disgraced in their narrative as being right-wing, too right-wing. Now, my book, my study, my work has been ongoing from May 1981 up to now about Livingstone and about the impact of Livingstone and why Livingstone was a bad news against democracy in London. This is something that has been damaging to the Labour Party, and this has been reaped, if you like, by the loss of Corbyn as a left's leader. Because the leader of the Labour Party, there have been leaders, series of them. When Livingstone was there, it was Neil Kinnock. And Kinnock was followed by whoever was the leader after Kinnock was a right-winger, until Corbyn accidentally got included as a candidate for the leadership after Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband kind of successively showed that they were not up to it. Ed Miliband was the one that Corbyn replaced. But there is a secret that has come out recently, only in the last 2 months, about Ed Miliband's comparative skills compared to Corbyn. I'm not talking about his character, but I am talking about his skills. As he cornered Boris Johnson in the House of Commons, on the floor of the House of Commons, about the deal, Brexit deal. And he completely destroyed Boris Johnson. I would say that in history, those few seconds or the minute or so of Ed Miliband's main intervention would go down in history as defining moments in destroying Boris Johnson. So Corbyn was many times less skilled or skillful, as Ed Miliband has shown. Not once in the 5 years that he was there did Corbyn manage to come anywhere near what Ed Miliband did in that minute or so. Not about David Cameron, not about Theresa May, not about Boris Johnson, of course. So Corbyn had a series of 3 conservative leaders, conservative prime ministers over the 5 years, and he didn't manage anything. And I would say that he should have managed right from the start. He should have scored against Cameron. Big time, he should have. He should have scored against Theresa May, big time. And Corbyn should have scored against Johnson, big time. And he didn't. So does it remind me of the fact that Corbyn actually volunteered that I was a better speaker than him. Not only that, he said he wished he could speak like me. Was it more than just a compliment? It could be, couldn't it? He didn't say that, but it could be. And it is on reflection now over the period now 38 years. 38 years ago, he said that he wished he could speak like me. 38 years later, it is proven that Corbyn doesn't possess the intellectual material or the vision or the ability. So all of the people who pushed him forward to become the leader of the Labour Party were wrong. Not because the slogans that he was spewing were wrong, but because he was not up to it. And it is frighteningly also true that the Labour Party didn't have anyone else. Because the people who were on the list of contenders made speeches that didn't amount to anything. Andy Barnum failed, Yvette Cooper failed, and all the others, kind of less popular than those two, failed as well. And I'm looking at the Labour Party now, since Corbyn said that to me, 38 years on. The Labour Party is exposed as a bankrupt ideologically, in terms of intellect, and in terms of ethics and morality, and in terms of democratic fitness, a bankrupt organization. Compared to Corbyn, this is a bankrupt person.